November 15, 1943. Bougainville Island, Cole Brennan, 23 years old son of the Bitterroot Mountains, held 3 dented Campbell's soup cans in his hands. Garbage. That's what everyone called them. Empty tin shells that had once held chicken noodle soup, now crusted with rust and jungle mud. In 5 days, those 3 pieces of trash would kill 112 Japanese soldiers and rewrite the doctrine of modern warfare forever. But on November 1st, none of that had happened yet. On November 1st, Cole Brennan was just another Marine corporal trying to survive in the worst jungle hell the Pacific had ever seen. And on November 1st, the Japanese owned the shadows. The rain came down in sheets that morning. Not the clean mountain rain Brennan remembered from Montana, but something thick and hot that turned the jungle floor into a swamp of rotting vegetation and boot-sucking mud. 23 Marines had died in 7 days, not from bonsai charges, not from artillery, from bullets that came from nowhere fired by men no one could find. The Japanese snipers on Bougainville weren't just good, they were ghosts. They fired once, maybe twice, then vanished. No muzzle flash, no sound signature beyond the crack of the bullet itself. By the time you heard the shot, someone was already dead. And by the time you looked for the shooter, he was 300 yards away, melting into green darkness that swallowed men whole. Brennan had been on the island for 9 days. He'd killed 4 Japanese soldiers in that time. Respectable work for a Marine sniper. But the math didn't lie. 4 enemy dead, 23 Marines dead. They were losing. Captain Pierce Wallace stood in the rain outside the battalion command tent, hands on his hips, staring at nothing. He was 38 years old. West Point educated a man who believed in order and doctrine in the weight of superior firepower. He did not believe in ghosts. But he believed in body counts, and the body count was destroying his command. "Brennan," Wallace's voice cut through the rain. Flat, exhausted. Brennan approached, rifle slung across his back boots, making obscene sucking sounds with every step. He didn't salute. Nobody saluted in the field. Salutes identified officers. Officers made excellent sniper targets. "Sir." Wallace looked at him, really looked, studying the 23-year-old corporal like he was a problem that needed solving. Brennan had that effect on officers. He didn't look like a killer. He looked like someone who should be teaching school or fixing tractors back in Montana. Quiet face, patient eyes, the kind of man who could sit motionless in the woods for 6 hours waiting for an elk to make a mistake. "How many enemy snipers do you think are out there?" Wallace asked. Brennan considered the question. Not the answer Wallace wanted, but the real answer, the true one. "Could be 3, sir. Could be 10. Could be 1 man moving fast." "Your professional assessment, Corporal." "It's a system, sir, not random. They're coordinated. Someone's running them like a network." Brennan paused. "We're not fighting snipers. We're fighting an intelligence operation." Wallace's jaw tightened. "Then how do we break it?" Brennan didn't answer right away, because he didn't have an answer. Not yet. All he had was the sick feeling in his gut that told him the rules of this fight were wrong. You couldn't outshoot these men. You couldn't outmaneuver them. They knew the terrain. They knew the angles. They knew where Marines would be before Marines knew themselves. "I don't know yet, sir." Wallace nodded slowly. Not the answer he wanted, but at least it was honest. "Figure it out, Corporal, because at this rate, I won't have a battalion in 2 weeks." November 8th changed everything. The day started like all the others, heavy overcast, humidity so thick you could taste it. The jungle pressed in from all sides, a wall of green chaos that turned visibility into a guessing game. Brennan moved through it with Corporal Rafael Santos, his spotter, a man from South Texas who'd grown up hunting javelina in brush country and understood patience the way most men understood breathing. They'd been paired together for 4 months, long enough to develop the wordless communication that kept sniper teams alive. Santos would glass the terrain with binoculars. Brennan would watch Santos's body language. A slight stiffening meant something worth seeing. A slow exhale meant stand by. A flinch meant get down now. They were observing a suspicious patch of vegetation 600 yards northeast when Santos stiffened. Not the good kind of stiffening, the kind that meant he'd seen something dangerous. Brennan shifted his eyes to Santos, not his head. Movement killed snipers. "What have you got?" Santos didn't answer immediately. His binoculars stayed fixed on a section of jungle canopy where the green looked slightly wrong. Not obviously wrong, just wrong enough to make a trained eye pause. There's a... The bullet arrived before the sound. It entered Santos's skull just above the left eye and exited through the back of his head in a spray of red mist that painted the ferns behind him. Santos dropped instantly. No cry, no struggle, just the terrible physics of a high-velocity round meeting soft tissue and bone. Brennan froze, not from shock, from calculation, because the shot had come from at least 600 yards away, threaded through jungle canopy, and placed with surgical precision on a target that had been moving. That level of skill meant one thing: whoever fired that shot was still watching, waiting to see if Brennan would panic, waiting for him to move, waiting for the second target to expose himself. So Brennan didn't move. He lay there next to Santos's body, controlling his breathing, forcing his heart rate down through sheer will. 30 seconds passed, then a minute, then 5 minutes. The jungle sounds returned slowly. Birds, insects, the distant rumble of artillery from another sector. But no second shot, because the Japanese sniper didn't need a second shot. He'd already moved. Brennan spent the next 40 minutes motionless, replaying the geometry of the kill, the angle of Santos's fall, the trajectory of the bullet based on the entry and exit wounds, the likely firing positions given the terrain and available concealment. Piece by piece, the picture formed in his mind. The shooter had been elevated, probably 30 to 40 feet up in a tree. He'd been watching this specific area, waiting for targets of opportunity. And he'd fired only once because firing twice exposed position. This wasn't an amateur. This was a professional who understood sniper doctrine as well as Brennan did. Maybe better. When Brennan finally moved, he moved slowly, inches at a time, dragging Santos's body with him as he low-crawled back toward friendly lines. It took him 2 hours to cover 300 yards. 2 hours of pulling a dead friend through mud and thorns while calculating, always calculating, whether the enemy was still watching. He made it back. Santos didn't. That afternoon, while Brennan was giving his report to Lieutenant Dalton Sharp, word came in about Private Luther Hastings. Infantry, 3rd Platoon, shot through the throat while observing from a covered position. Dead before he hit the ground. Brennan felt something cold settle in his chest. Hastings had been 200 yards from where Santos died. Different angle, different terrain, same result. And according to the witness reports, Hastings had been killed while looking through binoculars. Just like Santos. 2 trained observers, same day. Both killed within 30 minutes of each other while using optical equipment. That wasn't coincidence. That was a pattern. They're hunting observers, Brennan said quietly. Lieutenant Sharp looked up from the map table. He was 28, college-educated, sharp enough to listen when experienced NCOs talked. Explain. Santos and Hastings, both using binoculars, both killed while actively observing. The enemy isn't taking targets of opportunity. They're specifically hunting anyone trying to gather intelligence. Sharp studied the map, his finger tracing the 2 kill sites. You're saying it's coordinated. I'm saying it's systematic, sir. They're not just snipers. They're a counterintelligence operation. They're blinding us. The implications hung in the air like smoke. If the Japanese were specifically targeting observers, that meant they understood something fundamental about American tactics. Marines relied on forward observation, spotters, intelligence gathering, visual confirmation before action. Take away the eyes of a unit and you take away its ability to function. Sharp leaned back, his face grim. So what do we do? Brennan didn't answer right away, because the honest answer was, I don't know. You couldn't fight an enemy you couldn't see. You couldn't shoot back at muzzle flashes that didn't exist. And you couldn't out-snipe someone who understood the terrain better than you did. But you could change the game. The thought formed slowly, more instinct than logic. Something his father had taught him years ago in the mountains of Montana. A lesson that had nothing to do with war and everything to do with understanding how living things behave when faced with the unknown. Sir, Brennan said slowly, I need 5 days. 5 days for what? To try something that's not in the manual. Sharp studied him. That's not an answer, Corporal. I know, sir, but if I explain it, you'll say no, and I think it might work. The memory came to him that night while he sat in his foxhole eating dinner. Not dinner, really, just a can of Campbell's chicken noodle soup heated over a tiny fuel tablet, the kind of meal that tasted like hot salt water and nostalgia. Brennan ate it mechanically, not tasting it, his mind still trapped in the geometry of Santos's death. The sun was setting, not the gradual sunset of Montana, but the abrupt tropical drop where daylight simply switched off like someone flipping a breaker. In the few minutes between day and night, the light turned golden and strange, slanting through the jungle canopy at angles that transformed ordinary objects into something else. Brennan set the empty soup can down beside him. And that's when the light hit it. The tin surface, dented and scratched, caught the last rays of sunlight and threw a sharp beam across the jungle floor. A line of light maybe 6 feet long, bright enough to make him squint. Brennan stared at it. Then, curious, he rotated the can slightly with his finger. The beam swept left, a deliberate arc like someone signaling with a mirror. He rotated it again. The beam swept right. Something clicked in his mind, not a thought yet, just a recognition. A pattern from years ago, from a different kind of hunting in a different kind of terrain. He was 12 years old again, crouched in the November snow of the Bitterroot Mountains with his father beside him. They'd been tracking a bull elk for 3 days, and the animal had gone nocturnal, bedding down in thick timber where it couldn't be approached. Brennan's father, Augustus, had stopped him at the tree line. "Boy," Gus said quietly, "you can't chase him. He's smarter than that. Stronger, too. You go in there, he'll hear you and vanish. But you know what he won't ignore." Young Cole shook his head. Gus picked up a piece of quartz white stone that caught the morning light like a diamond. He angled it until it threw a reflection into the timber. A bright flash. Then another. Then he tucked it away and waited. "Animals run from threats," Gus said. "But everything investigates light they don't understand. Give it 15 minutes. He'll come look." They waited, and 20 minutes later, the bull elk stepped out of the timber, head up, eyes searching for the source of those strange flashes. It stood there in the open for 30 seconds. Long enough, Brennan had never forgotten that lesson. Animals run from danger, but unknown stimuli trigger investigation. It's instinct, hardwired. Even prey animals can't resist the urge to understand something that doesn't fit their pattern recognition. Now sitting in a jungle foxhole on Bougainville with an empty soup can in his hands, Brennan understood something else. Something his instructors at sniper school had tried to teach him, but he'd never fully internalized until this moment. Soldiers weren't that different from elk. A soldier sees a threat, he takes cover. Standard doctrine, automatic response. But a soldier sees something he can't categorize, something that might be a signal, might be important, might be intelligence. He needs to report, he investigates. Because investigation is also doctrine. Observe and report, gather intelligence, verify unknowns. The Japanese snipers were hunting observers, men whose job was to investigate, men who couldn't afford to ignore potential signals. And a soup can reflecting sunlight in random patterns would look like a signal. Maybe, possibly, something that needed verification, something that demanded investigation. Brennan turned the can over in his hands. Battered tin, worth nothing, weighed maybe 3 ounces. In the entire history of warfare, probably the most useless object a soldier could carry. Unless you could make the enemy believe it mattered, unless you could weaponize their curiosity. He sat there in the gathering darkness, turning the can, slowly watching how the last rays of light caught its surface at different angles. Calculating, testing, thinking through the psychology of it. Not the mechanics were trivial. The psychology was everything. If he placed cans in neutral territory and made them flash in patterns that suggested intentional signaling, what would a trained observer do? Report it. And what would an enemy sniper do if ordered to investigate potential American communication methods? Move to observe. An observation meant exposure. An exposure meant a target. It was absurd, insane. The kind of idea that would get him laughed out of any tactical planning session. Fighting a war with soup cans. But the more Brennan thought about it, the more the logic held. He wasn't trying to fight the Japanese snipers in a conventional duel. He was trying to manipulate their decision-making process. Turn their training against them. Make them come to him. The next morning, Brennan found Captain Wallace outside the command tent looking like he hadn't slept. None of them had slept much. The Japanese ran night harassment operations, random mortar fire, and patrol probes designed to keep everyone exhausted and jumpy. Sir, I need to talk to you. Wallace looked at him with red-rimmed eyes. Brennan, tell me you have something. I might, sir, but I need 5 days to test it, and I need you to trust me without asking too many questions. Wallace's expression darkened. Corporal, I have 23 dead Marines in a battalion that's starting to believe this jungle is haunted. I don't have time for mysteries. I understand, sir, but if I explain what I want to try, you'll call it the stupidest thing you've ever heard. And maybe you'll be right, but Santos is dead, Hastings is dead, and conventional counter-sniper tactics aren't working. So I'm asking for permission to try something unconventional. Wallace stared at him for a long moment, the kind of stare that weighs a man's competence against the desperation of the situation. Define unconventional. Psychological warfare, sir. Instead of hunting them, I want to make them hunt something that isn't there. That's not a definition, Corporal. That's a riddle. Brennan held his ground. 5 days, sir. If it doesn't work, you can send me back to the line and forget I ever suggested it. But if it does work, we might be able to break their intelligence network without firing a shot. Without firing a shot, you're a sniper, Brennan. Shooting is your job. Shooting is the easy part, sir. Getting them to expose themselves, that's the hard part. And right now, they're not exposing themselves because they own this terrain. I want to change that equation. Wallace rubbed his face, the exhaustion evident in every line. Finally, he nodded. 5 days. You can have Corporal. No. He stopped himself. Santos was dead. You work alone. Report directly to Lieutenant Sharp. But Brennan, if this is some kind of experimental bullshit that gets more Marines killed, I will personally court-martial you and make sure you spend the rest of the war cleaning latrines in Guam. Are we clear? Crystal clear, sir. Then get started. And Corporal, whatever this plan is, I hope to God it's not as crazy as you're making it sound. Brennan didn't respond because it was exactly as crazy as it sounded. Maybe crazier. He spent that afternoon collecting garbage, not just any garbage, specifically empty soup cans. Campbell's mostly because that's what the quartermaster distributed. Chicken noodle, tomato, vegetable beef. Brennan didn't care about the flavor. He cared about the reflective quality of the tin and the size of the can. Needed to be large enough to catch sunlight but small enough to be easily concealed. Needed to have enough surviving surface area to throw a visible beam, but not so much that it looked artificial. Other Marines watched him picking through refuse piles and shook their heads. Word spread quickly. Brennan's losing it. Combat fatigue. Wouldn't be the first sniper to crack under pressure. He collected 43 cans, cleaned them, tested them, found 5 that had the right combination of size, reflectivity, and damage. 2 pristine, and they looked like equipment. 2 destroyed, and they wouldn't reflect enough light. These 5 were perfect, dented but functional, ordinary but useful. By evening, he had his materials. 5 soup cans, thin wire for mounting, wooden stakes carved from jungle bamboo, 50 yards of light cordage for remote angle adjustment. The entire kit weighed less than 2 pounds and cost the United States Marine Corps exactly $0. Lieutenant Sharp found him arranging the cans in his foxhole, testing different angles with a small mirror to simulate sunlight. Brennan, what the hell are you doing? Brennan looked up. Testing reflective angles, sir. With soup cans. Yes, sir. Sharp crouched down, studying the setup with the expression of a man trying to determine if he was witnessing genius or insanity. The captain said you had a plan. I assumed it involved bullets and tactics, not trash. It does involve tactics, sir, just not the kind we're trained for. Explain it to me. And Brennan, if you say trust me, I'm going to assume you've lost your mind. Brennan set down the can he was holding. He'd been dreading this conversation because explaining the idea out loud made it sound ridiculous. But Sharp had earned an answer. Sir, the Japanese are hunting our observers. Specifically, they're targeting anyone trying to gather intelligence. That tells me they're trained to investigate anomalies. It's part of their doctrine. Agreed, continue. So what if we create anomalies that aren't threats? Things that look like signals or communication attempts, but are actually just random reflections. The enemy sees them, reports them, and sends someone to investigate. But the investigation point is 300 yards from where I'm actually positioned. They expose themselves, examining something harmless, while I have a clean line of fire from a completely different angle. Sharp was quiet for a moment. You want to use light reflections as bait. Yes, sir. That's the plan, soup cans and sunlight. It's more complicated than that, sir. It's about understanding how trained observers react to unidentified stimuli. They can't ignore potential signals. It's not in their training. So I'm going to create signals that demand investigation. And when they investigate, they die. Sharp stood up slowly, his face unreadable. Brennan, that might be the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. It also might be brilliant. I genuinely cannot tell which. 5 days will tell us, sir. And if it doesn't work, then we've lost nothing except 5 days. But if it does work, we might be able to kill their entire observation network without them ever figuring out how we're doing it. Sharp looked at the soup cans, then at Brennan, then back at the cans. Finally, he nodded. 5 days, Corporal. Make them count. November 9th, day 1. Brennan moved before dawn carrying his 5 soup cans and mounting equipment in a small pack that also held his Springfield M1903A4 rifle ammunition water and enough rations for a day. He'd scouted the location the previous evening, a slight rise 300 yards behind the forward Marine positions, overlooking a neutral zone that both sides used for observation. The key was placement. The cans needed to be visible from Japanese positions, but not obviously planted. They needed to look accidental, natural, like debris that just happened to be there. Brennan spent 30 minutes arranging them, each mounted on a thin stake driven into the soft jungle earth, each angled slightly different to catch morning sunlight at different times. Can 1 and 2 45-degree angle designed to reflect during the early morning sun between 6:15 and 6:30. Can 3 and 4 60-degree angle reflective window between 7 and 7:15. Can 5 30-degree angle lower intensity intermittent flash pattern based on wind movement. He ran thin cordage from each can back to his actual firing position, 300 yards south and 30 feet elevated in a stand of trees that gave him clear sight lines to the can locations without being anywhere near them. The cordage allowed him to adjust angles remotely, crude but effective. Then he waited. Waiting was what snipers did best. Not shooting, waiting. Brennan had once waited 14 hours in a Montana tree stand for a whitetail buck that never appeared. This was the same. Patience, stillness, the ability to exist in a space between thought and action where time became irrelevant and discomfort became background noise. 6:15. Right on schedule, the sun broke through the morning cloud cover. The first can caught it perfectly, throwing a sharp beam of light across the neutral zone. 3 seconds. Then the angle changed as the earth rotated and the beam disappeared. Nothing happened. 6:20. Can 2 flashed, longer this time. 5 seconds of reflected light that swept across the jungle like a lazy searchlight. Still nothing. Brennan wasn't discouraged. Patience. The enemy needed time to observe, assess, report, and decide. This wasn't about immediate reaction. This was about creating a pattern strange enough to demand investigation. 6:47, movement. A figure emerged from the tree line 420 yards from Brennan's position. Not running, not casual. The deliberate pace of a man investigating something he's been ordered to check. Japanese uniform, standard infantry, not sniper configuration. He carried binoculars in his left hand. He was heading toward the soup cans. Brennan's breathing slowed automatically. The Springfield came up smooth stock, settling into the pocket of his shoulder like it belonged there. Scope picture, clear. The Japanese soldier was moving through sparse vegetation visible from the waist up. He stopped, raised the binoculars, started glassing the area where the cans were located. Perfect. Brennan's crosshairs settled on center mass, not the head. Center mass was more forgiving for long shots with wind variables. His finger found the trigger. Squeeze, don't pull, steady pressure. The moment between heartbeats when the body is perfectly still. The rifle cracked. Through the scope, Brennan saw the impact. The soldier dropped backwards, disappearing into the undergrowth. Clean hit. No follow-up needed. And then exactly as predicted, the jungle erupted. Mortar fire, lots of it. 40, maybe 50 rounds, hammering the area where the soup cans were located. The Japanese had triangulated the approximate position of what they thought was an American signal station and were suppressing it with everything they had. Trees exploded. Earth fountained into the air. The noise was tremendous. Brennan watched it from 300 yards away, completely untouched, already calculating his next move. They'd taken the bait. They believed the cans mattered. They'd sent someone to investigate, and that someone died. Now they were reacting with doctrine: suppress the threat, destroy the position, eliminate the capability. But there was no position to destroy. Just 5 empty soup cans that would survive the barrage and be ready to flash again tomorrow. He waited until the mortar fire stopped. Then he waited another hour. Then he low-crawled out of his position and made his way back to friendly lines, leaving the cans in place. Lieutenant Sharp found him that evening. "I heard mortar fire. Heavy concentration. You?" "Yes, sir. They hit the decoy position hard. At least 40 rounds." "And you, 1 shot, 1 kill, 0 casualties on our side." Sharp's eyes narrowed. "It worked." "Day 1 worked, sir. They think the cans are a threat. They sent someone to investigate. That someone died looking at trash while I was somewhere completely different. The question is whether they'll adapt or repeat." "What do you think?" Brennan considered it. "I think doctrine is powerful, sir. They've been trained to investigate anomalies. One dead soldier won't change that training overnight. They'll send more people, maybe smarter people, maybe officers, but they'll send someone, because they need to know what those light flashes mean." "How many more days do you need?" "All 5, sir. This is day 1. By day 5, we'll know if this is sustainable or if I just got lucky once." Sharp nodded slowly. "All right, Corporal. 4 more days. But Brennan, that mortar barrage, that's proof they're taking this seriously, which means they're going to start taking you seriously. Watch yourself." "Always do, sir." But that night, lying in his foxhole staring at the jungle canopy, Brennan knew Sharp was right. The Japanese had just fired 50 mortar rounds at 5 soup cans. That was escalation. That was commitment of resources. That meant somewhere in their command structure, someone had decided those light flashes represented a genuine threat worth eliminating, which meant tomorrow they'd send someone better. Someone trained, someone disciplined, someone who wouldn't make the same mistakes as the infantry soldier who died today. They'd send a professional. Brennan closed his eyes, Santos's face flickering behind his eyelids. Luther Hastings, 23 Marines dead in 7 days. And now finally a way to make it stop. A way to turn the invisible enemy into something visible, something targetable. 5 soup cans, 3 pounds of garbage, and an understanding of human psychology that said everyone investigates what they don't understand, even when they shouldn't, especially when they've been trained to. 4 more days. Let's see how many of them come looking. Day 2 began with rain. Not the violent tropical downpour that turned the jungle into a curtain of noise, but a steady drizzle that softened the light and made everything gray. Brennan moved to his position in pre-dawn darkness, carrying 8 soup cans this time instead of 5. Expansion, evolution. The principle had worked once. Now he needed to prove it was repeatable, scalable. Not luck, but method. He'd spent the previous evening refining the system. The original 5 cans were still in place, untouched by the mortar barrage, because the Japanese had been shooting at shadows. Now he added 3 more spread across a 500-yard front. Different angles, different flash patterns. The goal was to create the impression of multiple signal points, as if the Americans were running a coordinated communication network using light, which they weren't. It was just tin cans and sunlight. But perception mattered more than reality. Brennan positioned himself 400 yards from the nearest can cluster, elevated in a natural hide, formed by fallen timber and dense undergrowth. Clear sight lines to all 8 positions. Multiple escape routes. Good concealment. He settled in and waited for sunrise. The rain stopped at 0600. 10 minutes later, the clouds broke, and sunlight poured through in shafts that looked almost biblical. The first can caught it at 0617. A brief flash, maybe 2 seconds, then can 3. Then can 7. Not random, but not obviously patterned either. Just strange enough to look intentional. Brennan watched through his scope, scanning the Japanese-controlled terrain for movement. Nothing for 20 minutes. Then at 0638, 2 figures emerged from different positions. Not together. Separated by roughly 200 yards. Both moving cautiously toward different can locations. Both carrying rifles and binoculars. This time the Japanese weren't sending infantry grunts. They were sending men who understood tactical movement. Brennan made a decision in half a second. Two targets, one shooter. Take the closer one first. Distance 430 yards. Wind negligible. Elevation minimal. He settled the crosshairs on the lead soldier's chest and fired. The man dropped. The second soldier reacted instantly, diving for cover. Trained response. But his cover faced the wrong direction. He'd assumed the shot came from near the cans. Brennan was nowhere near the cans. The soldier stayed frozen behind a log that concealed him from the decoy position, but left him partially exposed to Brennan's actual location. Brennan cycled the bolt chamber to fresh round and fired again. Two shots, two bodies, 3 seconds between them. The Japanese response came faster this time. Mortar fire within 5 minutes concentrated on the can positions. But something else happened too. Rifle fire, lots of it, dozens of Japanese infantry opening up on the approximate location where they thought Brennan must be hiding. Except he wasn't there either. He was 400 yards south, watching them waste ammunition on empty jungle. When the shooting stopped, Brennan counted to 1,000, then low-crawled out of his position and relocated to a completely different area. Never use the same hide twice. Basic fieldcraft. The Japanese would search his original position. Let them. By the time they found it, he'd be half a mile away planning tomorrow's deception. Lieutenant Sharp was waiting when Brennan returned to the Marine perimeter that afternoon. 2 kills confirmed, Sharp said without preamble. Forward observers saw both go down. Clean shots. The Japanese are going insane trying to find your position. They've been saturating the jungle with suppressive fire for 3 hours. They're frustrated, sir. Good. Is it because frustrated enemies do unpredictable things? Sharp pulled out a map. Radio intercepts from Lou Graves. She's been monitoring Japanese communications. They're reporting unknown optical phenomena. They don't know what the lights are, but they know men die investigating them. That's putting pressure on their command structure. Brennan studied the map, noting the kill locations. Pressure is the point, sir. Every man they send to investigate is one less observer in their network. Every hour they spend trying to solve the light problem is an hour they're not gathering intelligence on our positions. You're not worried they'll figure it out. Eventually they will, but by then we'll have thinned out their observation network enough that it won't matter. This isn't about winning forever. It's about winning the next 72 hours. Sharp folded the map. 3 more days, Corporal. Make them count. That night, Brennan couldn't sleep. Not from fear or adrenaline, but from the weight of the thing he'd created. 2 days, 3 kills, 0 Marine casualties in his sector. The math worked, the psychology worked, but there was something hollow about it. Something that felt less like combat and more like laying traps for animals who didn't know any better. Santos would have understood. Santos, who died because he lifted binoculars at the wrong moment. Who'd never had a chance because the enemy was invisible and the rules of engagement were designed for a different kind of war. Brennan pulled out his canteen and took a long drink of metallic-tasting water. 3 more days. Then he could stop. Then someone else could carry this forward or abandon it entirely. But for 72 more hours, he was committed to this absurd, brutal, effective idea. Weaponizing curiosity. Making men die for investigating light. Day 3. November 11th. Brennan woke to the sound of artillery. Not close. Maybe 3 miles northeast. The war grinding forward in other sectors while his little corner of it played out a psychological drama with soup cans and sunlight. He ate breakfast cold, a can of hash that tasted like salted cardboard, and checked his equipment. Springfield rifle. 60 rounds. 8 soup cans with remote angle adjustment. Water. Medical kit. Everything he needed to spend another day killing people who made the mistake of being curious. He was moving toward his planned position when Lou Graves intercepted him. She was 21, sharp-eyed, perpetually covered in mud like everyone else, and probably the best radio operator in the battalion. She'd been monitoring Japanese communications for 2 weeks, building a profile of their command structure and tactical language. "Brennan, wait." He stopped. "What have you got, Lou?" She handed him a folded piece of paper. Translated intercept from 0400 this morning. "You need to read this." Brennan unfolded it. The handwriting was neat, almost prissy, the kind of penmanship that came from Catholic school nuns with rulers. Japanese transmission. 04:17 hours. Light phenomena confirmed multiple sectors. Casualties investigating 4 confirmed, 2 probable. Recommend immediate consultation. Kagami. Repeat. Recommend Kagami assessment. Brennan looked up. Kagami. It's a code name, means mirror in Japanese. We've been hearing it referenced for 3 weeks. Best guess it's their top sniper, the one who's been killing our observers, Santos, Hastings, maybe 10 others. Lou's expression was grim. They're calling in their best to figure out what you're doing. Something cold moved through Brennan's chest. Not fear exactly, more like recognition. The understanding that the game had just changed. Up until now, he'd been fighting infantry and standard observers, men doing their jobs competently but not brilliantly. Kagami was different. Kagami was the man who'd killed Santos with a 600-yard headshot through jungle canopy. Kagami understood sniper work at the highest level. When Brennan asked, unknown, could be today, could be tomorrow, but they're scared enough to ask for help. That tells you something. It told him everything. The Japanese were adapting. They'd recognized the pattern and were bringing in a specialist to counter it, which meant Brennan's window was closing. He could maybe get one more day of routine kills. After that, Kagami would be watching, analyzing, waiting for Brennan to make a mistake. Thanks, Lou. Brennan, she caught his arm. Santos was my friend too. I know what you're doing with these soup cans seems crazy, but it's working. Just be careful. Kagami isn't like the others. He nodded and moved out. The morning proceeded like clockwork. Brennan set up his cans, took position 500 yards southwest, and waited. Sunrise came at 06:19. The cans started flashing at 06:25. By 0700, 3 Japanese soldiers were moving toward different camp positions. Brennan took them in sequence. First target at 400 yards, second at 520, third at 380, 3 shots, 3 kills, textbook sniper work. The Japanese responded with their now familiar pattern mortars on the decoy positions, rifle fire saturating the area where they thought he must be hiding. But Brennan was already gone, relocating to a position he'd prepared the previous day. Never stay still, never become predictable. Keep moving, keep them guessing, keep the pressure on. 9 kills in 3 days. 0 Marine casualties in his sector. The numbers told a story that was starting to spread through the battalion. Brennan, the crazy corporal with the soup cans, was actually winning. But that afternoon, something changed. Brennan was returning to friendly lines through a route he'd used twice before. Stupid. He knew it was stupid even as he did it. Fatigue made you lazy, made you forget the basics. He was moving through thick vegetation, rifle slung, attention divided between the terrain ahead and the mental checklist of tomorrow's positioning. That's when he saw it. A reflection. Tiny. Laser thin. A line of light that swept across his path and disappeared in less than a second. Brennan froze. Not a reflection. A deliberate beam. Controlled. And it had swept past exactly where his head had been 3 seconds earlier. He dropped flat, hard hammering, and counted to 30. Then, moving in inches, he crawled sideways off the trail and into heavy cover. From behind him, maybe 600 yards distant, a rifle cracked. The bullet hit a tree exactly where he'd been standing, right at head height. Kagami. Brennan lay motionless, barely breathing. The hunter had become prey. Somewhere in that jungle was a man who'd just tried to kill him, using the exact same principle Brennan had been exploiting for 3 days. A scope reflection. A flash of light to mark the target. Then the shot. Kagami had been watching, learning, and now he was playing the game in reverse. Brennan didn't move for 40 minutes. When he finally did, it was a painstaking crawl through undergrowth, so thick it left his uniform shredded and his hands bleeding. He took a circuitous route back to friendly lines, adding 3 hours to a journey that should have taken 20 minutes. But he made it, alive. Sharp found him that evening in the command area, cleaning his rifle with hands that shook slightly. You look like hell, Corporal. Kagami found me, sir, or almost found me. He's using scope reflection to hunt. Same trick I'm using, just targeting me instead of investigating cans. Sharp sat down heavily. So he's figured it out. Not completely. He doesn't know about the cans yet, but he knows there's an American sniper operating in his sector, and he knows approximately where I've been working. He's smart, sir, really smart, and he's patient. Brennan set down his cleaning rod. I need to kill him before he figures out the full system. How? By making him investigate something he can't ignore. The plan formed overnight. Not a refinement of the soup can method, but an escalation, a trap designed specifically for a sniper who understood sniper doctrine. Brennan couldn't beat Kagami in a straight duel. Kagami owned this terrain. He'd been operating here for months, knew every angle, every hide, every approach. But Kagami also had a job. And his job was eliminating threats to Japanese intelligence gathering. So Brennan would create a threat too obvious to ignore. Day 4, November 12th, Brennan spent the morning constructing an elaborate fake forward command post 400 yards behind Marine lines. It took 6 hours and help from 3 other Marines who thought he'd lost his mind. Maps spread on a field table, radio equipment, antenna, personnel moving in and out with apparent purpose. And surrounding it all, carefully positioned soup cans arranged to flash in patterns that mimic tactical signaling. To a distant observer, it looked like a critical American command node, vulnerable, active, important, the kind of target that demanded immediate attention from enemy intelligence. But it was all theater. The maps were blank. The radio was dead. The personnel were 3 privates who'd been ordered to move around for 30 minutes before withdrawing to safety. And the soup cans, they were doing what they always did, reflecting light in ways that suggested intentional communication. Brennan positioned himself 720 yards north of the fake command post, elevated in a tree that gave him a clear line of sight to a famous piece of terrain. A massive strangler fig with a trunk 8 feet wide and branches that spread like a cathedral ceiling. The tree where, according to witness reports and trajectory analysis, Santos had been killed. If Kagami was going to observe the fake command post, he'd do it from an elevated position with clear sight lines. And the strangler fig was the best option in a 500-yard radius. It offered concealment height and overlapping fields of fire. It was exactly where Brennan would position himself if their roles were reversed. So that's where he aimed his rifle. And waited. 9 hours of waiting. The sun moved across the sky. The fake command post below performed its pantomime of military activity. The soup cans flashed on schedule. Birds called. Insects droned. The jungle breathed its humid, suffocating breath. And Brennan sat motionless in a tree eye glued to his scope, watching a section of strangler figs 720 yards away for any sign of human presence. The human eye detects movement first. Not shape, not color, but motion. So Brennan watched for motion. And at 14:47 hours, he saw it. Not obvious movement, not a person stepping into view, just a slight shift in the foliage pattern. A branch that swayed wrong, against the wind instead of with it. Someone was up there. Someone heavy enough to affect branch movement. Someone trying very hard to stay still, but not quite succeeding. Brennan's breathing slowed. His heart rate dropped. This was the moment. 720 yards. 8.2 miles per hour crosswind from the east. 78 degrees Fahrenheit. Humidity 86%. All variables calculated. All unknowns accounted for. The shot was possible. Difficult, but possible. He waited, because shooting at a suspected position was guesswork. He needed confirmation, needed to see the target, needed to be certain. At 14:48, a rifle barrel eased into the gap between branches. Slow, controlled. The movement of a professional setting up for a precision shot. The barrel was aimed down toward the fake command post. Kagami was preparing to kill what he thought were American officers. Brennan adjusted his point of aim. Not at the rifle. At the space just behind it, where the shooter's body mass would be. He couldn't see a person, but he could see the geometry, could calculate where a man would have to be positioned to achieve that rifle angle. He exhaled halfway, let his body settle into perfect stillness, and squeezed the trigger. The Springfield cracked. Through the scope, Brennan saw bark explode from the strangler fig, saw the rifle barrel jerk, saw something dark fall through the branches and crash to the jungle floor 70 feet below. For 3 seconds, nothing. Then a second figure appeared, scrambling down the tree in panic. Kagami's spotter. Younger, less disciplined. He hit the ground and tried to return fire toward the fake command post, still believing that's where the threat originated. Brennan's second shot took him in the upper chest. The spotter dropped and didn't move. Silence returned to the jungle. The kind of silence that follows violence and feels like the world holding its breath. Brennan stayed in position for another hour, watching for reinforcements, watching for tricks, watching for any sign that this wasn't over. But nothing moved. The strangler fig stood quiet, holding its secrets. At 1600 hours, Brennan finally climbed down from his tree and made his way back to friendly lines. He didn't approach the strangler fig, didn't verify the kills. That was infantry work. His work was done. Lieutenant Sharp met him at the perimeter. We heard 2 shots, long interval. Kagami's dead, sir, and his spotter. Sharp's eyebrows rose. You're certain? As certain as I can be without walking up and checking dental records. But yes, sir, I'm certain. Hauptmann. Brennan unslung his rifle. I built a target he couldn't ignore. A fake command post with signal activity that looked important. Then I positioned myself where he'd have to position himself to observe it. 720 yards. Wind from the east. I waited 9 hours. He showed up. Sharp was quiet for a moment, processing the implications. You didn't hunt him, you engineered a situation where he hunted himself. That's one way to put it, sir. And the soup can's still working. Still working. Tomorrow I'm expanding to 15 cans across 3 nodes. The Japanese are already confused. With Kagami gone, they'll be paralyzed. But that night, Brennan couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. He'd killed men before. 4 days ago, 9 days ago, in training exercises that became real. But those were abstract, distant figures in a scope, human-shaped targets that fell down when you did the math correctly. This was different. He'd shot Kagami from 700 yards, hadn't seen his face, didn't know his name, not really. Kagami was a code name, a designation, a tactical problem that needed solving. But after Brennan took the shot after the body fell, he'd done something against doctrine. He'd approached the strangler fig, not immediately. Hours later after dark, using the excuse of reconnaissance to justify violating his own rules about staying away from kill sites. He'd found Kagami at the base of the tree. The fall had been brutal, but the body was intact enough to search. Brennan had done it mechanically, looking for intelligence, documents, maps, anything useful. What he found was a photograph, tucked in the breast pocket of Kagami's uniform, protected in a small oilcloth wrapper. A picture of a woman and 2 young girls standing in snow. The woman was beautiful traditional Japanese features, wearing a winter kimono. The girls, maybe 5 and 7 years old, were laughing. Behind them, mountains. Not tropical mountains, proper mountains with snow and pine trees. Brennan had stared at that photograph for a full minute before pocketing it. He didn't know why he took it, didn't know what he planned to do with it. But leaving it there felt wrong, felt like erasing something important. On the back of the photograph, in careful handwriting, someone had written in English, Yamada family, Hokkaido, 1938. Kagami had a name, Takeshi Yamada, a real person with a real family. Now lying in his foxhole, he took out the photograph and looked at it again by flashlight. Kagami had a family. Of course he did. Everyone had a family. But knowing it and seeing it were different things. The little girls in that picture had a father who taught them something, loved them, somehow existed in their world as more than a soldier in a war. And now he was dead because Brennan had been smarter, or luckier, or just better at turning human psychology into a weapon. Santos's face flickered through his mind. Then Luther Hastings. Then the 23 Marines who died in the first 7 days of November. The ledger was complicated. Brennan had avenged them, had stopped the man who'd killed them. But the weight of it sat in his chest like a stone. He folded the photograph carefully and put it back in his pocket. Tomorrow was day 5. Then one more after that, 6 days total. Then it would be over. Then someone else could carry this forward or bury it. But for now, the work continued. 15 soup cans, 3 nodes. Saturation tactics designed to overwhelm the Japanese ability to distinguish real threats from fake ones. With Kagami dead, their observation network was headless, leaderless, vulnerable. Brennan closed his eyes and tried to sleep. But sleep didn't come easy. It never did anymore. Day 5. November 13th. The rain returned at dawn. Heavy, relentless. The kind of rain that made visibility drop to 50 yards and turned the jungle into a gray curtain of noise. Brennan stared at the sky and felt his carefully constructed plan collapsing. No sun meant no reflections. No reflections meant no soup can deception. The entire system depended on light. But as he sat there watching water pour off the edge of his shelter, an idea formed. Not light, sound. He spent an hour collecting materials, empty ammunition cans, small stones and gravel, thin cordage. By 0800, he'd constructed 5 sound-based decoys to supplement the light-based ones. Ammo cans filled with pebbles hung from branches rigged with strings that let him shake them from 200 yards away. The rattling sound mimicked equipment being moved. Careless, obvious, the kind of noise that suggested American troops operating without proper sound discipline. It was crude, but crude might work precisely because it was unexpected. The Japanese had spent 4 days investigating light phenomena. Now they'd have to process audio anomalies too. Different stimuli, same principle, create something that demands investigation, then punish the investigation. Brennan positioned himself in a new location central to both his light-based cans and his new sound-based decoys. Then he waited for the rain to stop. It didn't stop, but at 10:30 it slackened enough for Brennan to test his system. He pulled the string on the first ammo can. It rattled loudly, a sound that carried 300 yards even through heavy vegetation. Then he pulled the second string. Another rattle from a different direction. Response came within 12 minutes. A 4-man Japanese patrol moving cautiously toward the first sound source. They were being careful. Weapons ready, spacing good. But they were investigating. That was the point. Brennan took the lead man at 380 yards. Took the second man 4 seconds later. The remaining 2 dove for cover, but their cover faced the sound decoy, not Brennan's actual position. Third man down at 400 yards. Fourth man panicked and ran. Fifth shot missed. Sixth shot didn't. 4 kills. 2 minutes. 0 return fire in his direction because they still thought the threat originated near the rattling cans. The rain stopped at 1300 hours. Sun broke through 20 minutes later. Brennan's light-based cans started flashing on schedule, overlapping with the sound decoys to create a multisensory barrage of stimuli. Light from one direction, sound from another. Both demanding investigation, both positioned nowhere near Brennan's actual firing point. The Japanese response was visible even from Brennan's distant position. Confusion, units moving without coordination, officers exposing themselves trying to verify what their men were reporting. Radio traffic spiking as the command structure tried to process contradictory intelligence. Chaos. By day's end, Brennan had 15 confirmed kills, his highest single-day total. The Marines operating in his sector reported something unprecedented: 0 enemy sniper activity. 0 observation. The Japanese had effectively stopped trying to gather intelligence because every attempt to investigate unknown phenomena resulted in casualties. Captain Wallace found Brennan that evening. "Corporal, Lieutenant Sharp says you got 15 today." "Yes, sir." "With soup cans and ammo cans full of rocks." "Yes, sir." Wallace shook his head slowly. The expression on his face wasn't quite disbelief, but close. "5 days ago, I thought you'd lost your mind. Today I received a report from Division Intelligence. The Japanese transmitted a message this afternoon. We intercepted it. You want to know what it said?" Brennan waited. Wallace pulled out a folded paper and read, "Sector cursed. Light and sound phenomena unexplained. Casualties investigating 27 confirmed. Recommend immediate withdrawal. All forward observers ordered to avoid anomalies. Repeat, avoid all anomalies." He looked up. "Brennan, you didn't just kill 27 enemy soldiers. You killed their ability to trust their own senses. They're seeing threats everywhere. They're afraid of light, afraid of sound, afraid to investigate anything. Do you understand what that means? It means they can't do their jobs, sir. It means you broke them. An entire battalion's intelligence network shattered because of soup cans." Wallace folded the paper. "Division wants to expand this. They want you to train others. They want to systematize what you've done." "Sir, I still have 1 more day." "No, you don't. I'm pulling you off the line. Effective immediately. You've proven the concept. Now you teach it to others." Wallace's expression softened slightly. "You did good work, Corporal. Better than good. Santos would be proud." Brennan nodded but said nothing, because he didn't feel proud. He felt exhausted, hollowed out, like he'd been solving an extremely complicated math problem for 5 days straight and had finally gotten the right answer, but the process had extracted something from him that couldn't be replaced. That night, he sat alone cleaning his rifle, thinking about the photograph in his pocket. Kagami's family. 2 little girls who'd never see their father again. 27 other families getting similar news over the next few weeks. And Santos. and Hastings, and the 23 Marines who died before Brennan ever deployed his first soup can. War didn't create winners. War created survivors who had to live with what they'd done to survive. Lou Graves found him just before midnight. "Brennan, you okay?" "Define okay." She sat down beside him. "Captain says you're done. Training duty starting next week." "So I heard. You saved lives. You know that, right? Marines in this sector aren't dying anymore. That's because of you." Brennan set down his cleaning rod. "I killed 27 people in 5 days, Lou. Most of them died investigating light reflections from soup cans. They died because they were doing their jobs, because they were trained to investigate anomalies, because I turned their training into a death sentence. They also killed Santos and Hastings and 23 others. I know. So why do you look like the one who lost?" He pulled out the photograph, showed it to her. "Kagami, the sniper I killed yesterday, his family. I took this off his body." Lou studied the picture in the dim light. "Why'd you take it?" "Because if I didn't, no one would know he was human. He'd just be a confirmed kill, a number, a tally mark." Brennan took the photograph back. "But he was someone's father, someone's husband. He probably taught those girls how to track deer or read weather, same way my father taught me. And now he's dead because I understood human psychology slightly better than he did." Lou was quiet for a long moment, and then she said something Brennan would remember for the rest of his life. "The difference between you and a monster isn't whether you feel bad about killing. It's whether you remember that the people you killed were people. Kagami was human. So were the other 26. But so was Santos. So was Hastings. You didn't start this. You just found a way to stop bleeding on our side by making them bleed instead. That's not heroism, but it's not villainy either. It's just war." She stood up to leave, then paused. "For what it's worth, Brennan, I'm glad you're the one who figured out the soup can thing. Because someone who feels guilty about being good at killing is probably the only kind of person who should be trusted with that skill." She walked away, leaving Brennan alone with his rifle, his photograph, and the knowledge that 5 days had changed everything. The Japanese had withdrawn observers. Marine casualties had dropped to 0 in his sector. And somewhere in a filing cabinet at division headquarters, his report was being read, analyzed, and prepared for distribution. The soup can method would outlive him, would be taught to hundreds of snipers, would evolve into doctrine and procedure, and eventually into the foundational principles of deception warfare. But right now, on November 13th, 1943, it was just one exhausted corporal sitting in the mud, holding a photograph of 2 Japanese girls who would grow up without a father, trying to figure out if what he'd done was worth what it cost. The answer, he suspected, was something he'd spend the rest of his life trying to calculate. 5 days, 27 kills, 1 Japanese intelligence network destroyed, 0 Marine deaths in his sector. The math was simple. The morality was infinitely complicated. And tomorrow, ready or not, it would all begin again. Because Captain Wallace wanted him to teach others. Wanted to spread this idea, this method, this terrible, brilliant, effective trap. More soup cans, more dead observers, more families receiving news that their sons and fathers had died investigating light reflections in a jungle on an island most of them couldn't find on a map. Brennan closed his eyes and tried to rest, but sleep, as always, was elusive. Tomorrow the killing would stop being his personal burden and become systematic, institutional, permanent. Tomorrow the soup can sniper would become doctrine, and there was nothing he could do but watch it happen. November 14th, morning came without rain. Brennan didn't go to the line. For the first time in 6 days, he woke up behind the Marine perimeter knowing the operation was over. 5 days, November 9th through 13th, 27 kills, 0 friendly casualties. The numbers were final. He met them at 0800, Corporals Vance and Matthias and Private First Class DeWitt. All experienced marksmen, all skeptical. They stood in the rain outside the command tent looking at Brennan like he was a circus act they'd been ordered to watch. "Gentlemen," Brennan said, "for the next 2 hours, I'm going to teach you how to kill people with garbage." Vance snorted. He was 26 Tennessee drawl, 2 years as a designated marksman. "We heard the stories, soup cans, and magic tricks. With respect, Corporal, it sounds like bullshit." "It is bullshit. That's the point." Brennan picked up one of the cans he'd prepared for demonstration. This weighs 3 ounces, costs nothing, and in the right conditions, it's more dangerous than a Browning machine gun. Not because of what it does, because of what the enemy thinks it might do. He spent the next hour explaining the psychology, not the mechanics, the psychology. How trained observers react to unidentified stimuli. How doctrine creates predictable behavior. How you could weaponize the gap between perception and reality. The three snipers listened, skepticism slowly giving way to understanding. By noon, they were in the field setting up their own can arrays under Brennan's supervision. By 1400 hours, they had their first kills, two Japanese soldiers investigating light patterns while the Marine snipers fired from positions 400 yards away. Clean, efficient, repeatable. Jesus Christ, Matthias whispered, watching the enemy mortars hammer empty jungle where the cans had been. It actually works. It works until they adapt, Brennan said. Maybe 3 more days, maybe a week. But it works right now, so use it while you can. Over the next week, the three snipers racked up 18 additional kills using Brennan's method. The Japanese, already demoralized from 5 days of losses, began pulling back their forward observers entirely. By November 20th, Marine patrols were reporting something unprecedented: enemy observation posts abandoned, listening posts unmanned. The Japanese had effectively stopped trying to gather tactical intelligence in the sector because every attempt resulted in casualties they couldn't explain. By November 20th, the results were undeniable. Intelligence report showed Japanese forward observers had withdrawn from the entire sector. Not repositioned. Withdrawn. Battalion strength surveillance network simply gone. Lieutenant Sharp showed Brennan the maps. Red X marks where Japanese observation posts used to be. All abandoned. They're operating blind now. Haven't seen enemy reconnaissance in 48 hours. The three snipers Brennan trained had added 18 kills to the tally. Total 45 Japanese casualties in 2 weeks. But the real victory wasn't the body count. It was the silence. The absence of enemy eyes on Marine positions. Space to maneuver without being watched. That night, Brennan walked out to the perimeter and looked toward the jungle where he'd spent 5 days killing people with reflected sunlight. It was dark now, quiet. The rain had stopped and the stars were visible through breaks in the cloud cover. Beautiful in a way that made the war feel even more obscene. Santos was buried somewhere back in a field cemetery marked with a white cross and a serial number. Hastings, too. And Kagami, though his body had probably been recovered by Japanese forces and sent home to Hokkaido, to the woman and girls in that photograph. Brennan pulled out the picture. He'd been carrying it for 11 days now. Every time he considered throwing it away, something stopped him. Some sense that bearing witness mattered. That remembering the humanity of the people you killed was the only thing preventing you from becoming something worse than a soldier. You should keep that. Brennan turned. Lou Graves stood behind him, hands in her pockets, looking smaller than usual in her oversized rain jacket. Why, Quo? Because forgetting is easier, and easy is dangerous. She moved up beside him, looking out at the dark jungle. I heard you're going to division, going to teach the brass how to think like you. Apparently. You know what that means, right? Every sniper school in the Pacific is going to learn this. It's going to spread, evolve. 50 years from now, they'll still be teaching some version of what you figured out with soup cans. Brennan was quiet for a moment. That doesn't feel like something to be proud of. It's not, but it's not something to be ashamed of either. It's just true. Lou turned to face him. Cole, you're going to spend the rest of your life wondering if you did the right thing. I can't answer that for you, but I can tell you this: Santos didn't die for nothing. Neither did Hastings. You took their deaths and turned them into something that saved 200 Marines in this sector alone. That's not redemption, but it's not meaningless either. She walked away, leaving Brennan alone with the stars and the photograph and the knowledge that tomorrow everything would change again. The war would grind forward. The soup can method would spread. And somewhere in some future conflict, he couldn't imagine soldiers would use evolved versions of this idea without ever knowing where it came from. History wouldn't remember the 3 ounces of tin. It would remember the principle. Control perception, control behavior. Make the enemy see what you want them to see, and they'll do what you want them to do. Simple, elegant, terrible. And it had started with a Montana hunter who understood that Elkin soldiers weren't so different after all. Both investigated what they didn't understand. Both died when curiosity overrode caution. Brennan tucked the photograph back in his pocket and headed to his tent. Tomorrow, the rear echelon. Briefings and questions and men with clipboards trying to turn chaos into doctrine. But tonight, for a few more hours, he was just a 23-year-old corporal who'd figured out how to win a small corner of a massive war, and who would spend the rest of his life wondering what that victory actually cost. The presentation at division headquarters took 3 days. Brennan stood in front of 37 officers ranging from captain to colonel, explaining the soup can method while feeling increasingly like a fraud. Because he hadn't invented anything revolutionary, he'd just applied basic principles of hunting to human behavior. The officers didn't care. They saw results. Measurable, repeatable, scalable results. "Corporal Brennan," said Colonel Hendricks, a barrel-chested man with gray temples and 3 rows of ribbons. "What you've described is essentially a force multiplier that costs nothing and requires minimal training. Is that accurate?" "Yes, sir, with caveats." "Explain the caveats." "It works until the enemy adapts, sir. Once they understand the mechanism, they'll stop investigating anomalies. At that point, the method loses effectiveness. I estimate 3 to 6 weeks of operational viability before countermeasures develop." Another officer spoke up. "But in those 3 to 6 weeks, how many enemy casualties could a trained sniper inflict?" Brennan did the math in his head. "Conservatively, 15 to 20. Optimistically, 40 to 50. Depends on enemy density and whether they're willing to keep sending people to investigate." The room went quiet. Someone coughed. Then Hendricks leaned forward. "Corporal, do you understand what you've just described? A single sniper using trash and sunlight, potentially inflicting 50 enemy casualties with 0 risk to friendly forces. That's not a tactic, and that's a weapon system." "With respect, sir, it's not a weapon system. It's psychological exploitation. There's a difference." "Explain." Brennan chose his words carefully. "A weapon system can be used repeatedly without degradation. This method degrades rapidly because it relies on enemy ignorance. Once they understand they're being deceived, they'll change their doctrine. At that point, you're back to conventional sniper operations." "So it's temporary." "Everything's temporary in war, sir. But yes, this is more temporary than most tactics. It has a short operational lifespan. The question is whether that lifespan is worth the resource investment." Hendricks smiled, not warmly. "Corporal, the resource investment is empty soup cans. I think we can afford it." By December 1st, Brennan had trained 18 snipers in the deception method. By January, it was being taught at Camp Pendleton as part of the advanced sniper curriculum. By March of 1944, every Marine sniper in the Pacific Theater had been exposed to what was now officially designated Reflection Deception Protocol. The Japanese adapted as Brennan predicted. By February, their field manuals included explicit instructions: do not investigate optical or audio anomalies without fire support. Assume all unknown phenomena are enemy deception. But the damage was done. Japanese observation networks across the Pacific had learned to distrust their own senses. They gathered less intelligence, made more cautious decisions, ceded tactical initiative to Marines who weren't afraid to investigate the unknown. The soup can method directly killed an estimated 240 enemy soldiers between November 1943 and July 1944. But the indirect effects, the degradation of enemy intelligence gathering, the paralysis of decision-making, the psychological impact of not trusting what you see, those effects were incalculable. Brennan spent 1944 and 1945 teaching, not fighting, teaching. He trained 420 snipers in psychological warfare principles. Most of them never use soup cans. They use the underlying concept. Create stimuli that demand investigation. Position yourself nowhere near the stimuli. Punish investigation. Simple, repeatable, deadly. 15 of his students died in combat. Brennan learned their names, attended their memorial services when possible, and tried not to think about whether his teaching had saved them or killed them. Both were probably true. The war ended in August 1945. Brennan was 25 years old, a sergeant now decorated with a silver star he didn't want, and a combat action ribbon that felt heavier than it should. He mustered out in September and went home to Montana with a duffel bag, $200 in separation pay, and a photograph of Takeshi Yamada's family that he still carried everywhere. The Bitterroot Mountains looked exactly the same. That was the thing that struck him hardest. He'd been gone 4 years. He'd killed at least 72 people, probably more. He'd created a method that killed hundreds. He'd changed the way the Marine Corps thought about warfare. And the mountains didn't care. They stood there indifferent and eternal, unchanged by anything that had happened in the Pacific. His father met him at the train station. Augustus Brennan, 61, now grayer and thinner, but still carrying himself like a man who'd spent his life in hard country. They shook hands, didn't hug. That wasn't their way. Son, Dad, you look old. I am old. They drove home in silence, not uncomfortable silence, just the silence of two men who understood that some things couldn't be spoken, only endured. When they reached the house, Gus poured 2 glasses of whiskey, and they sat on the porch watching the sunset over the mountains. You kill people, Gus asked eventually. Yes. How many, bro? Don't know exactly. More than 50. Less than 100. Gus nodded slowly. Your mother wants to know if you're okay. I told her you're not, but you will be eventually. That accurate, Brennan thought about it. Probably. Good enough. Gus took a drink. War's different for everyone. For me, it was noise and mud and being scared all the time. For you, geometry and psychology, figuring out how to make people do what I wanted so I could kill them for doing it. That's darker than what I did. I know. They sat in silence for a while longer. Then Gus said something that Brennan would remember every day for the rest of his life. Your grandfather fought in the Civil War, shot people he could see. Your uncle fought in the First War, shot people he couldn't see. You fought in this war, made people shoot themselves in a way. I don't know what the next war will look like, but it'll probably be even more removed. Eventually, we'll figure out how to kill people who don't even know they're in a war. He looked at Brennan. Point is, son, every generation finds a new way to kill efficiently. That's not something to be proud of. But it's not something to be ashamed of either if you were trying to protect people you cared about. Question is, were you? I was trying to stop Santos from dying. Then I was trying to stop more people from dying. Then I was just trying to finish what I'd started. Good enough. That's the only answer that matters. Maggie Flynn came to see him 3 days later. She was 26 now, working as a school teacher, never married, still wearing the locket Brennan had given her before he shipped out. They sat in the same cafe where they'd said goodbye 4 years earlier. You're different, she said. I know. You going to tell me about it? Not much to tell. I learned it how to kill people creatively. Got good at it. Came home. Cole. She reached across the table and took his hand. I waited 4 years. I can wait longer if you need me to. But you have to decide if you're going to spend the rest of your life haunted by what you did, or if you're going to build something worth the paint. He looked at her, really looked. She was beautiful and patient and deserved better than a man who carried photographs of dead enemies in his wallet. I don't know if I can be what you need me to be. I don't need you to be anything except honest. Can you do that? I can try. Then that's enough. They were married in October 1946, small ceremony, family only. Brennan wore his dress uniform and felt like an imposter. Maggie wore white and looked like the only real thing in a world of shadows. They honeymooned in the mountains hunting elk with Brennan's father, and for 2 weeks Brennan felt almost human again. He took a job teaching high school physics. Turned out he was good at it, good at breaking down complex systems into simple principles, good at making students understand cause and effect. He never told them he'd learned those skills killing people. They thought he was just naturally patient and methodical. By 1950, he had 2 children. By 1960, he was known as the best problem-solving teacher in 3 counties. Students who couldn't grasp physics anywhere else came to him. He taught them the same way he taught Marine snipers. Identify the system, understand the variables, control what you can, predict what you can't. He never told anyone about the soup cans, never told anyone about Bougainville. His children knew he'd been a Marine, knew he'd fought in the Pacific, but nothing more. That was intentional. Some knowledge was burden, not legacy. But he still carried Takeshi Yamada's photograph, still looked at it sometimes late at night when the dreams got bad. The girls would be grown now, probably married. Maybe they had children of their own. Maybe they told those children about their grandfather who died in a war on an island they'd never heard of. Brennan hoped they told them the truth, that their grandfather had been a warrior who died doing his job, that he'd been brave and skilled and honorable, that he'd fallen in combat against an enemy who respected him enough to remember his humanity. Because that's what Brennan told himself when the guilt got heavy, that Kagami hadn't died meaninglessly, that their duel had mattered, that remembering it, bearing witness to it, was the only way to honor both the victory and the cost. The years passed. 1960, 70, 80. The world changed in ways Brennan couldn't have imagined. Computers, internet, warfare becoming increasingly abstract. Drones killing people from 7,000 miles away. Cyber attacks destroying infrastructure without firing a shot. And through it all, the Marine Corps kept teaching reflection, deception protocol. The soup cans themselves became obsolete, but the principle endured. Control perception, control behavior. Make the enemy investigate false signatures while you attack from unexpected angles. It evolved into electronic warfare, radar spoofing, decoy emissions, honeypot servers in cyber operations, deepfake videos in information warfare. All of it traced back in some way to the idea that you could weaponize curiosity, that you could make an enemy destroy themselves by investigating things that weren't real. In 2005, the Marine Corps opened a new exhibit at the National Museum in Quantico. Brennan was 85 walking with a cane, but they flew him out from Montana for the dedication ceremony. The display case held his Springfield rifle, his Silver Star, and 3 original soup cans from Bougainville. Rusted, dented, utterly ordinary. The plaque read Corporal Cole Brennan, Reflection Deception, Pioneer 72, confirmed enemy casualties 0, friendly losses, Bougainville Campaign, 1943. Brennan stood in front of the case for a long time remembering, not the glory version, the real version. Santos dying, Kagami falling, 27 men investigating light because their training told them to, the weight of being right, the cost of being effective. A voice behind him, Japanese accent. "Excuse me, are you Corporal Brennan?" He turned. An elderly man, 78, maybe Japanese features, weathered by time. "I am. Who's asking?" "My name is Hiroshi Yamada. My father was Sergeant Takeshi Yamada, Japanese Imperial Army. Sniper. He died on Bougainville in November 1943. Brennan felt the world tilt slightly. Kagami. Yes, that was his designation. Hiroshi's eyes were kind but sad. "I was told you might be here. I came because I wanted to meet the man who killed my father." This was the moment Brennan had been dreading for 62 years. The reckoning, the accusation, the judgment. He straightened as much as his old body allowed. "Your father was the best sniper I ever faced. If our positions had been reversed, he'd have killed me. I was lucky." "No," Hiroshi shook his head. "You were not lucky. You were intelligent. My father's diary was recovered in 1949. It was returned to my mother. The last entry written the morning he died said this." He pulled out a worn paper and read, "The American uses hunter's mind, not soldier's mind. He thinks like prey and predator simultaneously. If I die today, it will be because I met my equal. There is honor in that." He looked up. "I did not come to accuse. I came to thank you." Brennan couldn't speak, couldn't process what he was hearing. Hiroshi continued, "After the war, I immigrated to America. 1952, I became a citizen, raised my family here, and I always wondered about the man who killed my father. Wondered if he was a monster or a soldier. When I learned your name, learned what you did after the war teacher, father man who lived with honor, I knew the answer." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a photograph, the same photograph Brennan had carried for 62 years. "This was taken from my father's body. I have always wondered what happened to it. Do you know?" Brennan's hand trembled as he reached into his wallet and pulled out the worn, faded duplicate. "I took it, carried it every day since. I don't know why. Maybe because I needed to remember that your father was human, that what I did wasn't abstract." Hiroshi stared at the photograph, then at Brennan, then back at the photograph, his eyes filled with tears. "You carried my father's family for 62 years. I'm sorry, I should have found a way to return it. No." Hiroshi gripped Brennan's arm. "You honored him. The greatest respect a warrior can give an enemy is to remember their humanity. You did that. For 62 years you bore witness. That is, he couldn't finish. He was crying now openly, and so was Brennan. They stood there in the museum, two old men holding photographs of people long dead, connected by violence and separated by time, but united in the understanding that war creates bonds as much as it destroys them. Finally, Hiroshi spoke. There is a Japanese concept, Teki Nagara Abare, which means praiseworthy is the enemy. My father died honorably facing a worthy opponent. You lived honorably remembering a worthy opponent. This is the best outcome possible from war. Not victory, not defeat, but mutual respect that outlives the conflict. He bowed deeply. Brennan bowed back as much as his old body allowed. They spent 2 hours together that day, talking about their fathers, their lives, the strange mathematics of war that takes everything and occasionally gives back something you didn't expect. When they parted, they exchanged addresses, promised to stay in touch. Actually, Mened. Brennan flew home to Montana the next day. Maggie met him at the airport, took one look at his face, and knew something had changed. You okay? I met Kagami's son. She went very still. What? Hiroshi Yamada. He came to the museum, wanted to meet me. Brennan handed her the photograph he'd carried for 6 decades. He thanked me for remembering his father as human. Maggie looked at the picture, then at her husband of 59 years, and smiled sadly. You've been carrying this weight for so long. Did meeting him help? I don't know, but it felt like something closing, like a circle completing. Good, you deserve peace, Cole. You've earned it. But peace, Brennan was learning, wasn't something you earned. It was something you built, day by day, choice by choice, remembering the people you killed, honoring the people you saved, teaching the people who came after, living a life that justified the cost of survival. He died 3 years later in 2008 at home in the Bitterroot Mountains, 88 years old, surrounded by family. The obituary mentioned his Marine service, his teaching career, his community involvement. It didn't mention the soup cans. That story was for military historians and museum displays. But at his funeral, an honor guard from the Marine Corps presented Maggie with a folded flag. And in the crowd, standing in the back, was Hiroshi Yamada. He'd flown from California to pay respects to the man who killed his father and then spent 62 years remembering that his father had been worth remembering. After the service, Hiroshi approached Maggie. Your husband was a great man, not because of what he did in war, because of how he lived after war. He taught me that enemies can become teachers, that violence can create understanding, that the worst moments of our lives can become the foundation of our best selves if we have the courage to learn from them. Maggie smiled through her tears. He would have liked hearing that. I know, that is why I came. The story should end there, clean, poetic, two old warriors finding peace across the divide of history. But stories don't really end, they just stop being told. The soup can method is still taught, not with soup cans anymore, with drones and decoys and digital signatures. But the principle endures. Every military in the world now has some version of reflection deception in their doctrine. They call it different things: electronic warfare, cyber deception, information operations. But at its core, it's still the same idea a 23-year-old Montana hunter figured out in 1943. Make the enemy investigate something that isn't real. Punish them for being curious. Control perception, control behavior. Simple, elegant, terrible, and effective. Always effective. In 2022, a military analyst wrote a paper titled From Soup Cans to Cyber Warfare, the Evolution of Deception Doctrine. It traced the lineage from Brennan's improvised method through 79 years of warfare evolution. The conclusion was stark. Modern warfare is fundamentally about controlling what the enemy believes to be true. This principle, accidentally discovered by an improvising corporal on Bougainville, has become the theoretical foundation of 21st century conflict. Navy SEAL training now includes a week-long module called Brennan Protocols. Army Rangers study the soup can incident as an example of adaptive problem-solving under resource constraints. Air Force drone operators learn the psychological principles of false signature generation. All of it traces back to 5 pieces of dented tin and a man who understood that Elkin soldiers aren't so different. The 3 soup cans in the museum are probably the most historically significant garbage ever preserved. School groups walk past them every day. Most don't stop. Some do. The ones who stop usually read the plaque, look at the rusty cans, and think, that's it. That's what changed warfare. Yes, that's it, because the cans didn't change warfare. Understanding that humans are predictable changed warfare. Recognizing that training creates exploitable patterns changed warfare. Realizing that you can make an enemy defeat themselves by triggering their own decision-making protocols that changed warfare. The cans were just the delivery mechanism. And Cole Brennan Hunter's son from the Bitterroot Mountains wasn't a genius. He was just someone who paid attention, who understood that the principles governing animal behavior also govern human behavior, who recognized that curiosity is both survival mechanism and fatal vulnerability, who figured out how to weaponize that vulnerability using 3 ounces of tin, and who spent the rest of his life remembering that the people who died investigating his deceptions were people, fathers, sons, husbands, warriors doing their jobs as well as they could with the training they'd received. That's the lesson nobody puts in the doctrine manuals. The psychological cost of being good at killing. The weight of remembering that your effectiveness came at the price of someone else's humanity. Brennan carried that weight for 65 years, carried it with grace and dignity and quiet honor. Never complained, never glorified, never forgot. And in the end, that's the real legacy. Not the kill count, not the doctrine, not the museum display. The legacy is that Cole Brennan proved you could be effective without being monstrous, that you could win without losing yourself, that you could create terrible, brilliant, devastating ideas and still remain fundamentally decent, that you could change the way wars are fought and still go home to teach high school physics and love your wife and raise your children and live a life that justified the cost of your survival. The soup cans are in a museum. The doctrine is in every military manual on Earth. But the lesson, the real lesson, is buried in Montana next to a man who understood that the hardest part of winning wasn't the fighting. It was living with what winning required, and doing it anyway, with honor, with memory, with the courage to bear witness to your own effectiveness and its human cost. That's the story nobody tells, but it's the one that matters most.